Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
Welcome back to another episode of the Advancement Podcast, Quarantine Edition. We have 4 people on here in different rooms at different places, and we are under 10. So we are legal and no one will arrest us.
Is there anybody within 6 feet of you?
I have a light within 6 feet of me. makes my face look nice and smooth. Can you see? If you're watching online. If you're listening, I'm still ugly. So we're here today. Back.
That's true. That's true. You've been ugly as long as I've known you.
Well, hey, I got a good-looking wife. That's all I need, right? It's actually her birthday today. Not when you're listening, but it is today. We're recording. It's her birthday. So
happy birthday, Crystal.
Yeah. So we are on today with 2 guests. I'll let Tim introduce because I'm bad with names and I don't remember his name. So don't shoot me and.
You're bad with names, but they're printed on your screen, so you can.
Oh, there it is. Oh, I see it now. Excuse me. Back up. I know Michelle, but so we're on with Michelle
today. We can't read. That's why we do
Leave
podcasts.
Oh, word.
So we're on today with Michelle Garland, the North Texas Kids Ministry Director, and Dr. Kurz. The doctor is in the house.
Dr. Charity Kurz. So
yes.
Charity is a degree in counseling. She's a counselor. She's also a professor, and she is a church planter. So
that I am.
Man, got the whole package right there for us today. So, hey, thank you, ladies, for being on. You know, we put out this podcast really as part of our ministry to help really to resource pastors. And during this whole process, this whole crisis process of quarantine, whatever it is, everybody's trying to figure out what to do. So we're just going to jump we're trying to be a resource for them. And in our last podcast, Michelle was with us and we talked about some practical things to do in kids ministry. But kids ministry and dealing with kids at home, Michelle is panicked because she's homeschooling. She's home with her kids, but she's homeschooling her kids. She's doing all this stuff. Do you have cabin fever yet, Michelle?
No, I'm okay. I'm an introvert, so I don't mind being at home, away from the people. It's the new title of teacher that is a little intimidating for my world.
Agreed.
So you guys are sweating this whole rural. Y'all pick on me off camera for being all rural, but I just go outside. If I get as an extrovert, not an introvert. My wife is so happy introvert. She's like, nobody's coming. And I'm kind of like, I can't go anywhere. So I go outside and I walk and I hike and I work on fences. So I get my extroversion out.
With the cows?
Sometimes with the cows. That's right.
Well, I'm an extrovert too. I'm an extrovert too. And I'm at the church every day because I can't stand to be at the house.
4 kids?
I'm just
too much for you? The 4 kids are too much?
All I have to say is I wanted 2. That's all I have to say about that.
Children don't listen to this later. Otherwise, they're going to have to go see Dr. Kurz for some therapy.
That's right.
Hey, they needed that before I said that. We'll just say it that way. They have me as their dad.
So when in the last time we talked about practical things that children's ministries could do. So now let's talk a little about content. How do we walk our kids through? What are the things that we need to be saying to them? How do we communicate in a way that brings the truth of the gospel, the truth of the situation, but doesn't communicate in a negative way? I mean, let's be honest. This circumstance is going to be is likely to be the defining episode for this generation of children. I mean, for Todd's generation, that's what 9/11 was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
for this generation, this is going to be that. So how do we walk through that? My kids are grown. I have college and adult children.
Tim's old.
Yes, that's right. My daughter is a teacher and my son is a junior in college. So I'm going to just step back and ask questions and let you guys help us. So who wants to go? So Todd, ask your question again. Ask the question you asked Michelle last time. Ask it again this time.
So we were having some conversations with some friends of ours, and we were talking through what we should tell our kids about what is going on. And there was some differing opinions. I'm not going to, as to not throw my friends under the bus, I'm not going to say which side who was on for what. But how much information do we give our kids as to not scare them or to help them to be informed that one day when they get older, they'll understand what they were living through? How do we walk them through this time?
You want me
Let's
to
go with the doctor.
Okay.
Okay.
This is a dialogue, so it's kind of like who goes first?
There.
I think I drew the short straw, so
Yes.
I'll go ahead and go first.
You do have the PhD. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that's really important in this time is I do think that we need to be honest with kids. I think Michelle said this before on the previous one, but I definitely think we need to be honest with kids. I think that we've got to consider development too. Where are kids developmentally and how they process information? I think one of the other key points of this too, as well, is how we react to the situation is going to help them react to the situation. And so we call it in my profession, in my study, we call it social referencing. It's the ways in which that adults respond, and then that tells kids to respond that way. It's kind of like when kids are little and they fall, and we tell parents, don't run and freak out about it, because then the kids will freak out about it. We're like, oh, just get up and brush it off, you'll be okay. And then most of the time kids just kind of go on their merry way. But when we're like, oh no, what happened to you? They get more worked up about it. And so we call it social referencing. It's the ways in which we respond. Kids will look to adults, and not just parents, they'll look to other adults in their lives as well and respond in ways similar. So I think it's really important the ways in which we're responding to it, and how that impacts children.
The delayed cry, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's Bandura's social learning theory, right? We learn from those around us. And so I think that's really important. So one of the concerns I have currently that I'm seeing with parents and just our community is the panic. People panic, they're panic buying, they're, stocking up pallets of toilet paper in their garage, and I think the concern for me is, what message are we sending our children, right, in this process of, so I feel like not only is it about what we say to our kids, but it's also how we're acting and how we're behaving.
Yeah, there's a statement last week that I saw, and actually I think I reposted it, but it was, your kids will either inherit your panic or your peace.
Wow. That's good.
For setting the atmosphere in your home. And if that means you're going to put some worship music on that encourages peace, then do it. If that means you're not going to have the news on unless the president or your, county person that's making the declarations is on, then do it. Like, I think we have to quiet the noise that instills the fear, not only in the kids, but also in the parents, because like she's saying, that's a learned.
That's really good, ladies.
That's good. And that's what I think a lot of our society is doing. Our first response is panic. When everybody, I try to tell people to listen to what the smart people are telling us to do. And the smart people are telling us, don't panic. But yet we're panicking, and it's making all of this a lot worse for everybody else. I mean, this week we're having to go buy meat from a restaurant because we can't find it in the grocery store.
Oh, that's why you asked me. That's why you texted me to ask if I had any beef for sale.
That text was from my wife.
You're the country guy. I feel like you should have some cow.
Kill me a cow, Tim.
I actually I actually have plenty of beef. We could go a long time. And if I need turkey, I'll go shoot one. And I've got eggs and chicken. We're not going to run out of meat at my place.
Hey, you're my token country boy. I need meat. I go to you.
Yeah, that's what I just heard. Shopping at Tim's house.
Woo! I'll even help you slaughter it.
Oh yeah, no, I'm out on all that.
I was joking too. I'm not going to do that.
So
What do you mean we have to slaughter it?
you're not one of those. I had the lady
Spoken like a true millennial.
I gave some, when I was years ago, I gave somebody some meat and they said, and gave them some fresh eggs and they said, but these come from a chicken, like from a chicken. And I'm like, so do all eggs, even the ones you buy in the store. They do. It's okay. So that brings us to you talked about the developmental component. That's the social piece and how we act is for sure a reality, but let's take Todd. Todd's got a 1-year-old to an 8-year-old. And so in the same household, the level of communication and the level and how and what we communicate in those contexts can be pretty different. Preschoolers to elementary to junior high. I mean, that's a great thing I hadn't thought about. So walk us through a little bit of what that might look like in the difference between these preschoolers and younger elementary, the different age brackets.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking y'all.
Yes.
Okay. Michelle, you want to take this?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Well, Michelle can follow it up.
Okay. Okay, so development. I think one of the big pieces to consider when we talk about development, you've got to think about development is not just physical development. Usually when we talk about development, that's where their brain goes. So we're talking about cognitive development. We're talking about psychosocial development. Faith development is a component as well. There's lots of different ways in which people develop. So I think one of the big primary factors in this case, when we're talking about processing of information, would be cognitive development. Where is a child cognitively to be able to process the information that they're receiving? Obviously, a 1-year-old is not going to process the information in the same ways in which a 7-year-old would process the information. As a matter of fact, there isn't much that I feel like you could be sharing per se with a 1-year-old about this other than they're safe, they're in a good place, they're being well taken care of. I think we communicate those things by the ways in which we behave. Again, behavior over words in that case. I think as kids get older, when we're talking about, elementary school, kindergarten, first, second, third grade, somewhere in there, kids will start to be able to think more concretely. They're going to be real concrete about this. They're going to want to know, okay, well, what does this mean specifically? What's going to happen to my body? What's going to happen to our home, our family? They're not going to necessarily think abstractly. They're not going to want to talk about how this affects the economy. That they don't care about that. That's more of an abstract thought. They're going to want to know specifically in the moment, what does this mean for us? And I know with my own children, I've got two, one who's more a concrete thinker and one who is more of a formal thinker or moving that direction. And my concrete thinker just kind of wants to know the basics, like, hey, look, here's the deal. We're probably going to eat rice and beans for a little bit if we have to, or we're not going to cough everywhere. We're going to make sure we wash our hands. Why? Because we don't want to get sick. We don't want germs. Where my older child, I'm having more in-depth conversations about what does this mean as far as it relates to our community. What does it mean as far as it relates to our faith even, have been some of the conversations that we've had. So kids in that early elementary stage are moving towards what we call concrete operations. That's a Piaget concept in his developmental model, cognitive development model.
You are now seriously being doctor on this right
Well,
there.
you asked me to be doctor, so I am.
I'm Googling as you talk.
So So I think concrete, right? Like, what can we tell them concrete? We want to make sure that they feel safe. Think about hierarchy of needs, right? We want them to feel safe. And so I think that's really important. But I also think it's important not to sugarcoat it. So I was clear with my children that meals might look a little different in our home because there is a shortage on things. Like we were blessed to get eggs the other day. I think we start looking at things in a different perspective too, right? Where you just assume that the eggs and bacon are in the refrigerator, but the reality is that like we had to go to 4 stores to get bacon, right? And so I think having those open conversations, but concretely with them to remind them that, hey, you're safe. Things are changing a little bit around here and we're going to be in this together. But I think it's such an opportunity as Christians to really help children connect the word to what is going on in their real life. Like God is still God. He's still on the throne in the midst of all of this. We're just having to adjust to life in a little different way.
That's good. Michelle, what would you add?
Yeah, I would just say be open with your kids. And that's exactly what she's saying, but allow them to ask questions. So they're, for the older elementary kids, like my kids are 11 and 13. So I've got one upper elementary and one in junior high. Their world has been rocked in a lot of ways. So their church has now been shut down. Their gym has now been shut down. Their sports have been canceled. Their school is now all at home. And so they just have a lot of questions. And so without me leading those questions, just allowing them to have an open platform to ask those questions. We've been just having nightly family combos every night. And, it's a variety of topics. Some of it's banter back and forth, but some of it gets pretty real. Like when do we get to, hang out with Grammy again? Because
return to family dinners in America. Oh my.
It's true.
I mean, it's just allowing them the freedom to ask whatever question is consuming their mind and answering it in a hopeful, positive, but real way, So reassuring their safety, reassuring that they're loved, reassuring, like Dr. Kurz said, that we're going to get through this together. And I don't necessarily know what it's going to look like either, but we're a family and we're going to be stronger on the other side for it. But you can always ask whatever question that you have.
So and I think part of this is our world. Dr. Kurtz, you were talking about cognitive ability. I'm finding that some adults don't even have the cognitive ability to handle this and just are going crazy with all this.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you brought up that point because when we look at cognitive development models, specifically Piaget, because that's who I've been talking about, his last stage is what we call formal operations, and it's the ability to think abstractly about situations. So for example, here's a great kids example. Last year during Valentine's Day, we were doing a lesson about love with the kids. And so I said at church, okay, so what's love? And one of my young ones said, well, Pastor Charity, that's like when, you get hugs and kisses and hearts and all of these things, right? And I kind of chuckled. And so my older ones that were in the room were like, no, that is not what love is. And so I say that to say that when we talk about formal operations, we're thinking abstractly. It's much harder to define love as a formal operational thinker than as a concrete operational thinker. And so there are some developmental theorists that believe that some people never make it to formal operations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think about it even in context. Yeah. Even in
context. I know that person.
Hey, I will drive to Stephenville.
Tim, this is not about self-disclosure, but
he needs a lot of that.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, I think about it in the context of some of the race conversations we have in society, right? Or we're not having in society. The ability, formal operational thinkers can put themselves in someone else's shoes and think abstractly about a situation and see the different angles. So I think you're right, Todd. I think you're right in saying that I'm not sure that all adults are necessarily in those shoes. And so then they're raising children, right? And maybe not necessarily. So this is the time where the church can come alongside families and help them navigate this.
Yeah, I think that's one of the important things about our conversation. And this idea of empathy is one of the things I've heard. I think I also heard you guys say, I'm going to take Michelle's thing, answer their questions. Sometimes as parents, because we've thought broader, our tendency is to give too much information. And so answer the question. We don't have to go beyond that. Just answer their questions as they come and let it happen that way. That way that keeps it on the right level.
So
questions are going to vary by age, but they're also going to vary by exposure.
Right.
So the more exposure
Good word.
to those, the things that, the news or social media or those things, the more questions they're going to have, because that's what they're seeing and hearing constantly.
Yeah. So part of it is, again, it goes back to our behavior. Our behavior also dictates some of the questions that they're going to have coming as a result of that, resulting.
Yeah.
Well, and I think ultimately for me, so I'm a parent too. That's what to me is one of the most important roles I play. But I think for me, I want my kids to look back on this time and see how my husband and I had faith in the Lord through this time, how our relationship with him grew. I think that this is a defining factor. They're not going to forget this moment. I mean, it's traumatic for some people, in all honesty. And I don't think it's going to be easily forgotten. I think it's going to be something like you said, Tim, it's going to define the generation. And so I think that I want my kids to be able to look back and go, my mom loved Jesus through this, right? And she taught us how to have faith and to trust him in this process. And she didn't panic, because she believed that he was her rock.
Yeah. Well, as believers, we've got to help. That's where we've got to be. We've got to anchor this. And as leaders who listen to this, pastors listening, that's where we can lean into our congregations and really help them know that this is a moment of faith over fear.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we still use wisdom. That's why we're in 4 different areas. We could have all met together and done this, but we're 4 separate places. We're all doing this because there's wisdom, but faith comes first. So that's excellent. Earlier somebody mentioned something about economics. With parents being home with their kids, I think there's one of the questions that I could hear kids asking is, why aren't you going to work?
Yeah.
And why aren't you going to work? And what that road leads to, because the anxiety of parents because of the economics of not being able to work, that's an added stress level. How can we help parents navigate that?
Yeah, I would love to, and I'm going to throw this to you, Charity, but just mental health in general. So like right now, if there's people in your churches or in your life that deal with depression or anxiety, now's the time to be checking on them, because isolation can be a terrible thing. It can be a gift in a lot of ways, but it can also be a terrible thing. But you deal with that, just talk about mental health and how we can help, people dealing with that. But then what that looks like for those parents that are dealing with anxiety. And now we have kids that are dealing with anxiety because of, that situation.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think that's been probably one of my biggest concerns as a counselor is how people are processing what's occurring and what's happening around them. And I think with kids, mental health concerns manifest in different ways. A lot of times you'll see it psychosomatically. Don't Google that word, I'll tell you. So psychosomatic has to do with having ailments that aren't really there, but they're experiencing them. So like a lot of times we'll see, oh, my stomach hurts, I have a headache, my body is aching, even like, things hurting, like my finger hurts or my hand hurts, and there's no reason for it to be hurting. You'll see it manifest in physical symptoms. And so I think it's really important through this time to be checking on our children in that way too, and making sure that the anxiety isn't manifesting other ways. So
I'm hungry, right?
That could be it too. They could be stress eaters.
Stop.
You know, I mean, I'm a little bit of a stress eater. I've got some ice cream in the freezer, you know, for those moments in the evening when the kids are in bed. But,
Ice
you know,
cream is a cure-all.
yes, right. So I think that, I think that you definitely have to be on the lookout for that. And even as a parent, having to check your own self and having good self-care strategies in the process. Sometimes that means that, like, I do give my kids a few minutes of tablet time, or it does mean that, you know, we're all going to do something they used to do at camp that I loved. It was called feet off the floor time. Michelle, I don't know if we do this in North Texas. We used to do this in Ohio. We called it feet off the floor time, where you had to be in your bed, but it didn't matter what you were doing in your bed. You could be reading a book, you could be coloring, you could be doing, but you just had to be there. And so sometimes it's little things like that to implement into your schedule that are healthy for you too as parents, especially when you're working from home. And, encouraging them to engage in self-care strategies. And it could be something like just playing with Play-Doh, or taking a walk around the neighborhood. Our neighborhood has done this thing, and it's not the only neighborhood that's done it, but they put teddy bears in the windows of the houses. So when kids go on walks, they are searching for the teddy bears in the neighborhood, which I think is a really cool idea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I just said, wow.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that I think that the key word here is intentional about self-care in these days, because we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know, honestly, we don't know if it's going to get worse. I've said that to my kids. I'm like, I don't know, but what I do know is Jesus is constant, that he's something I can rely on him, that he never changes. So even when all of this is going on around me, he's the constant. And so I think intentionally engaging in self-care and doing it with your kids, teaching them new ways to engage. I know we've even beefed up our devotional time together. Like, I've sat down and we do soap notes together now as a family. Before we would read, but we weren't as intentional about teaching them. And to me, we've utilized the time that we have, which has also been really healthy for our self-care.
So one of the things that you've used the word intentional, which I love the word intentional. I think, so to help Michelle as a now working stay-at-home mom who's now become a teacher in the midst of this, it sounds to me like part of this healthy piece would be creating routine, because all their routine has been thrown out the window. So creating a new routine. This is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to do it, and try and create routine.
Yes. Yeah. It's key. That's one thing about kids, period. Having consistency and routine. I mean, it's probably the number one parenting tip.
But I think it would also work for parents, because everybody, I mean, as pastors, I mean, even me, I mean, I know that I'm not, in what I do, working with pastors, this has thrown my entire schedule and my entire routine out. And I'm trying to figure out what's my new routine going to be during this season. So I don't go crazy, or I don't just
too late.
Well,
you set it up.
Well, the option was, do we dive in and create a new ministry routine during this season, or do I just go outside? I got plenty of work to do. I can be a full-time working with the cows and the fences. I can do that full time all day long, and I'd be happy. But there's a call of God component that I have to fulfill. And so I'm having to adjust and discover a new routine. So I think every leader is working on that. I mean, you've been doing sermon prep for Sunday, but now you have to do sermon prep maybe for a video and worship. I mean, every staff pastor, everything's different now. So it actually means a new routine.
Yeah. We call it finding a new normal.
Yeah. Right.
Love it.
Yep. Okay. So, go ahead, Todd.
I was going to ask one more question unless you're wrapping up.
No,
okay.
Go ahead.
How do we pastor, because this is more kids focused. How do we pastor parents to get themselves mentally healthy enough to lead their kids? Because ultimately our job is to help the parents lead their kids. It's not up to us solely to shepherd their children. How do we get them in a place to where they're not in panic mode and getting them to have these conversations with their kids that we're having.
Yeah, I think
Doctor,
if you can figure out the answer to that question, then you're going to be the $1 million man. That's
why we have a doctor.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not a doctor of all things, okay?
I'm a doctor. I'm not sure she's a miracle worker.
Exactly. Right. I will say this. I think that whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or not, it's the church's responsibility to come alongside parents, which is why we have such a strong family ministry emphasis in our church.
Yeah.
But I do think that part of it is just not having the resources. Part of our work as counselors is that we work to fill a client's toolbox with tools, right? So that's kind of the analogy I use. So that way, when they're in this situation, they can go, oh, this situation, I need a hammer. And they have a hammer in their toolbox, or they have a screwdriver, whatever it is. And so I think part of our responsibility as the church in this time is to come alongside parents and to provide those resources for them, and to provide a place of, okay, how do I address this topic? What you're doing right now with this podcast is resourcing people. I think that that's the role that we can play, is how can we resource parents to most effectively disciple their kids through this pandemic. And some of that, I think I've seen some churches doing some really awesome things. To me, it's, and this might sound a little, I don't know, I don't want you to take it the wrong way, but the children's services are really important that we're putting online, but so are the resources for parents to really help them disciple. Because here's the reality too. They aren't sitting in our churches every week either, right? They're in the home, and they're doing that in the home. And we need to, as much as possible, be giving those tools to parents to be able to disciple the kids in the right direction, and to, they're going to freak out when they don't have the tools. Think about it that way, right? If something is broke, like say a pipe breaks and you don't have anything to fix it in the moment, and you're scrambling, you're trying to figure out what to do with it. But if you had tools and you knew how to use those tools, you wouldn't probably have the same reaction. So I think some of it comes down to what tools can we give them to be able to respond most appropriately.
And I would say that this has been an age-old question in children's ministry, because we can't, as kids pastors or kids leaders, we can't fix a kid or a situation or disciple them in an hour a week. The parent should be the lead disciple maker in their home. But I think now it's causing, because of COVID-19, it's causing parents to go, oh, wait, I'm discipling my kids now. Just like I'm going, oh, wait, I'm teaching my kids now. And so it's almost caused this wake-up call of like, yeah, you should have been doing this the whole time. You should have been discipling your kids at home the whole time. The church can't do everything for you. Yeah. But here's some resources we're going to put in your hands to enable you, to equip you to do that.
Yeah, I agree, Michelle.
I really think that part of what the Lord is trying to do during this, and I mean, I have no, it's a word from the Lord, but my observation, it seems like the Lord is trying to, we've created a culture that's dependent on the congregation instead of believers who gather together. It's people who come because they're dependent on that congregation. And so it feels like this is a great opportunity for the church to get a reset, so that when we gather, it's really a gathering together of believers. It's a gathering together for worship. It's a gathering together for these things. It's forcing us to become disciples again, instead of just going and having someone dump on us, and take the responsibility for us.
Well, Tim, I think it brings us back to what our role is as pastors, right? It's to equip the saints. That's the role, right? Yeah. So I feel like it brings us back to basics almost.
I agree with you. I completely agree. I told someone yesterday that I hope and I expect that if this goes, I mean, we know from watching the news that we're looking at 6 to 8 weeks, but some are talking maybe longer. The longer this goes, the more the church will be changed in a way that it'll never be the same again. Yeah. And so I just am interested in what the Lord's really up to in this process. Thank you, ladies. So just really appreciate you guys being here and helping us navigate this, because kids ministry, they are not, Michelle loves to say, they're not the future of the church. They are the church. And so we need to be able to navigate that. And you've helped us out with that. So We just appreciate it. Thank you, guys. And
Yeah.
Todd,
Yes.
we'll see you next time
Next time on the quarantine
edition of the Advancement
of the
Podcast.
Advanced Podcast.
That's right. See you guys, everybody later.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.